Get up. That was the first thing you heard. No knock, no footsteps, just her voice. Low, flat, close. By the time you opened your eyes, she was already standing in the doorway. Coat on, boot laced, one glove pulled on, the other still in her hand. Put something warm on, now. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, down the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door. You scrambled to follow, jacket half zipped, boots still damp from earlier. The house was cold and dark, and outside, worse. The kind of cold that presses against your skin like it was waiting to see what you're made of. You didn't ask what this was about. You knew. The second she spoke, you knew. And when you stepped outside and saw the path she was walking, straight towards the back gate, where the barn light still glowed faint through the trees, your stomach dropped. The light. You hadn't turned it off. The latch. The check. The one thing. You were supposed to do one thing before bed, and you didn't. You didn't say anything as you caught up, just the sound of her boots crunching on gravel, the wind cutting sideways through the dark. The sky above was dark, cloudy, silent. The kind of night where nothing moved that didn't need to. You needed to explain. You wanted to say you didn't mean to, that you were tired, that you thought somebody else might have. Don't speak. Her voice broke through the wind like fabric through a knife. You shut your mouth immediately. She reached the gate first. It was swinging slightly open, not wide, but enough. The barn light was still on, a dull yellow glow spilling out like it didn't belong. She turned, faced you fully. Her eyes didn't narrow, her mouth didn't twist. She didn't raise her voice. But her presence hit harder than she had. Tell me right now, yes or no. Were you planning to lock this gate and kill the light before bed? You swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. Did you do it? No, ma'am. The wind picked up. She stepped once to the side, just far enough to reveal the full picture. Gate open, light burning, cold air slipping through the space that you were told to secure. Then you've got two problems, she said. You didn't follow instructions, and now I wonder if I can trust you with anything else. No yelling, no lecture, just those words, and the long, cold walk into your consequence, step by step. The gate still creaked behind you, slow and soft, the wind pushing it just enough to make a sound that wouldn't stop reminding you why you were out here. You stood still. She didn't. She stepped forward, very fast, and not aggressive. Just with that steady, grounded kind of walk that says, I mean every step. Her coat moved with the wind, the hem of it brushing against her boots. Every part of her looked calm, but nothing about her felt safe. She stopped right in front of the gate. Didn't touch it, didn't fix it, just looked at it. Like she was giving you a chance to see the problem with your own eyes before she said another word. Then she turned to you, fully now. The porch light behind you was too far to show her face clearly, but she could see the silhouette, her shoulders square, her hands at her sides, one glove, the other bare. Rain hasn't started, but the air carried the dampness that promised it soon would. The night was thick, heavy. She nodded at the gate. Do you see it now? Her voice was low, flat, structured. It wasn't a question you were meant to think about. It was one you were expected to answer. You nodded, but that wasn't good enough. Answer me. Yes, ma'am. Her head tilted slightly. And what do you think would have happened if I hadn't come out here tonight? You hesitated. She waited. Well? I don't know, ma'am. No, she said, stepping past you. You don't. She walked slowly around the gate, reaching for the latch, lifting it between her two fingers like it had disappointed her. She dropped it again with a soft metallic sound, then looked back at you. You were given one job. Just one. She turned her body fully to face you. And when I assign something, I expect it to be done. Not halfway, not almost, but not when you get around to it. You opened your mouth to speak. She raised a single finger. That was enough. You shut it. There's no confusion here, she said. I told you what to do. You said, yes, ma'am. I heard it. Clear as day. You understood, and you didn't do it. Another pause, just long enough to let it burn. I shouldn't have to check up on you. I shouldn't be out here in the cold after hours walking the line myself. You looked up. She caught it. Eyes up. Your head lifted instantly. Instinct, not defiance, survival. She nodded once. Better. She turned towards the barn, pointing at the light glowing through the open door. Go in, switch it off, lock everything you were supposed to lock. I'm not helping, I'm watching. You moved. Every step inside the barn door felt louder than it should. The gravel underfoot, the old hinges growing as you stepped inside. The warm air hit you first. Stale hay, wood, and something else. Something that shouldn't be warm this late at night. You scanned the area, unsure if you left something else undone. You flipped the switch. The light snapped off. Darkness swallowed the space instantly. You blacked out. Quiet. She was still standing there exactly where you left her. Hands folded behind her back, face unreadable. When you reached her, she spoke again. Was that hard? No, ma'am. Were you too busy to do it earlier? No, ma'am. Then explain it to me. You opened your mouth and nothing came out. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She walked ahead again, her pace slow, deliberate. This time, you didn't wait to be told. You followed. The walk back towards the gate felt longer this time. You weren't being dragged, and you were being pushed, but still, every step behind her felt like it landed like a reminder. There was no wind to hide in, no storm to blame, just the hard rhythm of her boots striking gravel and the quiet echo of your own trilling behind. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every inch of her posture told the story already. The way her head kept level. The way she didn't once glance back to check if you were following. The silence between you was deliberate, structured. It wasn't cold for sake of punishment. It was cold because warmth hasn't been earned back yet. When she stopped, she did so without warning. You nearly bumped into her. She was standing exactly where you'd failed to, in a spot where you should have stood earlier that evening. Her shadow stretched long over the gate. The barn light was off now, just like it should have been hours ago, but the damage had already been done. The latch still hung loose, the mistake still visible, and that somehow made it worse. She raised her chin slightly, not to look at you, but to take in the full scene. Her eyes moved over the path, the gate, the damp ground where the wind had pulled at the door. This wasn't just about what it had been forgotten. It was about where it had been forgotten, and how obvious it had been to anyone paying attention. Still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't point or pace. She just stood in it and made you stand in it too. It was the kind of silence that didn't beg for explanation. It just sat there, waiting for you to feel the full weight of it, without needing to be told where you went wrong. There was some kind of correction that came before words, and you were standing in it now. She took a slow step forward, reached for the gate, pressed it out with a firm, deliberate motion. The latch clicked. It was such a simple sound, but in that moment it felt like a verdict. She stepped back again, arms behind her once more, and let the quiet settle. In that moment you realized it wasn't about the gate, it wasn't about the light. It was about whether you could be trusted when no one was looking. Because she had looked, and she'd found it open. Now, every word she hasn't said sat heavier than any scolding could have. The silence didn't mean she was done. It meant she was giving you a chance to fully absorb what you left behind. And next, she began showing what it really meant. The gate was shut now, locked, but the moment hasn't. She stood still, not speaking, not moving, letting the weight of what could have been undone settle into the air between you. It was a silence so heavy it had shape, one that you could almost reach out and touch. It was curled around your shoulders and pressed down behind your knees, not violent, but avoidable. There was no chaos, no anger, no demand for an excuse. Just that steady, methodical stillness that she stood and carried like armor. In that stillness, you started to feel something shift. The need to explain, the instinct to protect yourself, gave away something else, something quieter, heavier, accountability. She turned your body slightly, just enough to face you without turning her back to the gate. Her posture hasn't changed since you were called outside. Upright, balanced, exact. There was no slack in the way she stood, no softness, just expectation. Then when she spoke again, it wasn't to offer an opening, it was to hold you to the truth. You weren't prompted to apologize, you weren't invited to justify. She asked you one thing, whether you had understood. But it was not just the task that you had missed, it was the standard that had been violated. She didn't ask it with a raised eyebrow or furrowed brow. She didn't tilt her head or lean closer. She simply stood there, unblinking, until you gave her the only thing she accepted, a full, deliberate answer, spoken aloud. And you did. You spoke it clearly, quietly, because that was all the space her tone allowed. Yes, ma'am. The words felt heavier than usual, not rehearsed, not automatic, but pulled from somewhere deeper, the part of you that understood, finally, that what was being corrected here wasn't about the gate or the light or the slip-up. It was about that mindset that allowed the slip-up to happen. She listened, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge. The answer didn't earn you anything. It simply brought you permission to be standing still where you were. Then came the second question, not in tone, but in presence. The one that she couldn't say out loud but pressing you against all at the same time. Can you be trusted again? You didn't speak this time, because you hadn't earned back the trust yet, because she wasn't asking for a promise. She was asking for proof. You took a simple step forward, deliberate, enough to close the space between without breaking the tension. Then she turned around and looked towards the barn, motioning with the barest flick of her chin. It wasn't a request. She expected you to move, to be correct, to finish what you were told to do hours ago. And this time, you obeyed without hesitation. No one told you to say anything, but before you turned your back, you gave her one more answer. Yes, ma'am, because some things are needed to be said, not for her, but for you. She didn't speak again for a long time, not as you moved back across the gravel, not as your boots kicked small stones out of your own way, not as you stepped onto the threshold where the task was supposed to have ended hours ago, but instead had quietly unraveled behind your back. She stood off to the side now, not close, not far, just within reach of your awareness. You could feel she was there without looking, like a border had drawn in the dirt. Not loud, not marked, but very real. She didn't interrupt, she didn't shadow you. She simply stayed, and that alone made the air heavy. The barn felt different now, not because it had changed, but because you did. The light had forgotten to turn off earlier, felt like something sacred. Every item inside that space, a shovel leaned too far, a feed bag not sealed, a coil of a hose that hasn't been rewound, whispered reminders of how casual you had been with the space that didn't belong to you, and how that felt earlier. Back then, the job had seemed small, ordinary, like something you could finish without being really present. A checklist item, a background task, something you could pass off with a nod and a half-hearted yep. Now you felt much weight that had been in the instruction, not because she had yelled, but because she had threatened everything, but because she didn't. She had trusted you, and that made every detail hit twice as hard. You worked in silence, you moved slower than before, not out of fear, but out of focus. You locked what needed locking, you shut what had been open, you checked everything twice, not because you were told to, but because anything less than would have felt dishonest. Even the smallest actions, pressing a latch, flipping a light switch, tightening a cap, felt like opportunities to fix something deeper than the barn door. Outside, you could hear the low scrapes of her boots shifting in the dirt. Not impatient, not following, just present. The kind of presence that asked no questions and inspected no chatter. She was giving you space, but not distance. You were being watched, not as a punishment, like a measure. Every movement was being weighted. She almost had seen what happened to you when she thought good tensions were enough, when she treated almost done like it counted, when you assumed someone else's would check. She'd seen it. She wasn't going to forget it, and neither were you. Not now. You didn't realize how long the work took until it finished, not because it was particularly complex, but because you weren't working off the clock anymore. You were working off a standard, and that was the kind of standard that didn't care about time. It only cared about whether you met it. And when you stepped outside again, cold and quiet, you didn't speak. You didn't have anything useful to say. Not yet. She looked at the barn once. Her eyes moved across the gate. The latch, the light, now off. She didn't nod. She didn't offer praise. She just took it like someone was collecting a fact. Something to file away, not to celebrate. Because this wasn't over. This was only your doing that should have been done from the beginning. And for her, that didn't earn anything. It simply brought you back to zero. What came next, if anything at all, would depend on whether you learned something worth keeping. You turned slowly and began walking again, her boots moving with the same steady weight as though to ground herself, bent from the rhythm of her pacing, and you followed, not because you were told, but because now you understood what it meant to be trustworthy when no one was looking. And the next time she gave you a job, you'd make sure it had to be done twice. The air was quieter now, and that late night kind of quiet, the kind that settles deep and doesn't move for anyone. She walked ahead, same pace as always, no rush in her step, no break in her posture, and you followed behind further than you had before, not because she told you to keep your distance, but because it had felt right. She hadn't dismissed you, she hadn't accused you. You were still inside the moment, still inside the consequence, and you hadn't been released from it yet. She didn't look back as she walked, but everything about her told you that this wasn't over. The task being done, the physical part anyways. But the standard, the principle behind it, that was being laid down, one word at a time. When she finally stopped, she did so deliberately, at the edge of the main path where the property met the fence line. The barn light was long behind you now, and the house stood dim and silent in the distance. She looked out over the field. The sky above was blanketed with clouds, and then she spoke, but not to scold, not to reiterate what had been made obvious, but she spoke to teach. Her voice was low, almost thoughtful, not gentle, not softened, just clear. There were some people who grew up thinking that forgetting small things isn't a big deal, that if no one gets hurt, it doesn't really matter, that someone will always be there to check, that they can get by on good intentions and charm and a decent excuse when something slips through the cracks. But not her. She learned it differently, not from a book, not from a lecture, from consequence. From watching what happens when the wrong gate is left open, when an animal slips loose, when a machine hums all night because someone didn't flip the switch, when food spoils, when water floods, when no one notices until it's already too late to fix. She had seen real things ruined by carelessness, and she had to carry the weight of it on herself more than once. Not because she meant to hurt anything, but because she didn't pay attention until someone else was paying for her mistake. That was the kind of lesson you didn't need just once, if you're smart. So no, she didn't overreact when she saw the task undone. She didn't make a scene because she liked the control. She set expectations. Because expectations, when you take them seriously, protect more than just property. They protect people. They protect trust. They protect you from becoming someone who only shows up when they feel like it. You listened, still, focused, uncomfortable. Not because her voice was cruel, but because it was right. She didn't ask if you agreed. She didn't need you to nod along. She was just laying down her standard. Because it was up to you to decide whether you had met it, or eventually made room for someone else who would. And the real weight of this moment. This wasn't about the gate anymore. This was about who you were becoming. And she wasn't going to stop drawing the line just because the weather was cold and the night was quiet. She'd drawn it once already. You had stepped over it, and now she was giving you one chance, just one, to step back where you belonged. She didn't give you the speech before handing you the responsibility back. There was no ceremony, no final warning, no long look or dramatic pause. She just gave you the chance to do it again. Not because she was letting go, but because she wasn't. Because doing it properly, in silence, with her watching, knowing that you already failed once, was the only way forward now. This time, you didn't drag your feet. You didn't sigh or glance at the sky or try to measure how long it would take. You just turned around, boots pressing deep into the gravel, and started the process again. You walked back to where the barn wasn't long, but it felt like it stretched out beneath you, like the path itself had grown heavier. You moved with precision, your body stiff but deliberate. Every step echoed in the truth you now carried. The first attempt hadn't counted, and when you reached the door, you started with the latch, double-checking it this time, making sure it clicked into place, testing it more than once to be sure. The sound of it securing fully was soft but final. You felt it vibrate through your fingers. Then came the light. You walked towards inside the control, shoulders squared, eyes scanning every corner. The space was dark now, and it should have been, but your eyes replayed it the way it had been earlier. Glowing yellow, door swinging half open, proof of your carelessness. This time, you didn't flip the switch. You paused, checking every other item that was in place. Feed bins closed, tools returned, floor swept. You didn't want her to come out tomorrow and find another mistake. Not because you feared her voice, but because you knew better now. And knowing better comes with a cost. You stepped out of the barn and pulled the door shut behind you with both hands, bracing for the weight, feeling the hinges settle. Then you checked the lock again, not once, but twice. Only then did you turn back. She was standing there where you left her, unmoved. Same posture, same weight and presence, still watching, not impressed, just not relieved, just focused, measuring every movement with the same expectation she carried since the moment she knocked on your door. You approached. Your pace was steady, not rushed, not dragging, and then you came to the full stop in front of her. You didn't speak first, she gave you no signal, because what came next wasn't about her, it was about you, about whether you understood what had to be done, whether if you had treated it like a redo task or a correction. And standing there, with the old, cold night pressing in and the silence between you held more weight than anything spoken, you felt it fully settle into your chest. You didn't fix the mistake because she told you to. You fixed it because you finally understood why it had to be done right the first time. You stood in front of her, shoulders square but tired, breath slower now. The cold had worked its way up into your sleeve, into your collar, into the joints of your fingers. You didn't move to warn yourself. You didn't fidget. You didn't speak. And she didn't rush. She watched you, the same way that she had been watching all night, calm and unreadable, and still very much in charge of the moment. When she finally spoke, it wasn't in anger. It was in conclusion. This part, the what you are standing in now, wasn't about reaction anymore. It was about boundary. Not the emotional kind, the structural kind. The kind that separates people who can be trusted and from people who make others clean up behind them. She didn't scold you, didn't go over this mistake again. She had already made the plan. And what she did instead was to make the next part crystal clear. There was no second round, no more knocks on your door, no more chance to correct something after she found it. The next time, if there ever was, she would just adjust, quietly, permanently. Because when someone shows her that she hadn't held the line when no one was looking, she didn't waste time to give them another. She simply put that trust into someone else's hands, not with spite, but with precision. And that was how she kept her standards intact. You listened, not because you were afraid of her, not in the unusual way, but because her words didn't come with a threat. They came with certainty, and certainty is heavier than any punishment. She told you plainly, you had been trusted with one simple job. You failed it, and tonight she gave you the dignity of a correction, not because she had to, but because she believed that you were capable of carrying that weight. Once, not again. There would be no, I forgot, no, it won't happen again, no, sorry, I was tired. Next time, if you slipped, there won't be a conversation. There would be someone else in that task list in the morning, and you wouldn't even need to know why. She wouldn't humiliate you, she wouldn't announce it. She would just quietly reassign the trust you mishandled. And that was the consequence. Not a punishment, replacement. You didn't argue, you didn't explain. You didn't say, I understand. Because in a moment like that, understanding isn't spoken. It's shown through actions, through consistency, through whether or not she has ever come to find you again. She let the silence close with distance, then gave you one last look, not of anger, but of calculation, as if to say, we'll see. Then she turned. No dramatics, no dramatic exit, just steady steps back towards the house. She didn't dismiss you, she didn't need to. You weren't finished until she believed it, and tonight you weren't going to rush that. She didn't speak again, not on the walk back, not when the house came in view, not even when the porch light caught the edge of her shoulder and revealed for the first time all night how little emotion she wore on her face. Because that was what made it feel real. The way she didn't need to speak, to look upset. The way she didn't need to do anything more than to walk away. She knew you were following, and that was enough. Each step was heavier than the one before, not because your legs were tired, but because the weight of what you had just been through wasn't letting go. You weren't being punished anymore. You weren't being corrected. You were just being watched, observed, measured over again in the silence. She stepped up on the front porch, her boots hitting the wood, that steady thud, and hadn't changed once all night. She reached for the door, opened it, and paused, not to let you in, but to do one final thing. She turned back and locked the door behind her. One clean click. It echoed. Not loud, not sharp, but final. The sound didn't mean that you were shut out. It meant the moment was sealed. She didn't say goodnight. She didn't leave the door behind her. She simply disappeared into the house, coat still on, gloves still damp, her presence carried forward like a closed file. Done, recorded. And you stood there for a long time, longer than you needed to. Not because you were confused, but because you understood perfectly. The standard had been laid out. Quiet, unbending, no second chances, no repeated warnings. You had been given one job. You failed it. You were corrected. And now that weight was yours to carry. Whether you would be trusted again, that depends on what happens tomorrow, and the day after that, and every time your name was on task. You have been brought back to the line, and you've been shown exactly what happened if you stepped out of it. No one was needed to say it twice. The porch stayed quiet after the door was shut behind her. There was no noise from inside the house, no creaking doors, no footsteps, no voice carrying down the hallway, just the low, distant hum of the barn light finally being turned off, like the empty night stretching around like it did, agreed to keep its voice down for that final moment. You stayed there, not because you had to, but because you were told that walking away too soon, even now, would make the wrong thing. It would suggest that you thought it was finished, that this would be filed away like any other mistake. It wouldn't. It wouldn't be. This kind of lesson wasn't gonna fade in the morning. It was the kind that was rearranged the way you moved, the way you looked at responsibility, at trust. Every task that you've ever handed to brushed off like it didn't matter, like it was some kind of correction that even made silence feel structured, like you could feel her presence in the air, not hovering, not haunting, just there, like a weight in the air hadn't been released yet. You didn't know that she was still standing inside the house, just out of view, listening. You didn't know if she was sitting down or moving on. And honestly, it didn't matter, because what needed to be said had been said, and what hadn't been said, you heard it anyway. You remember the way she looked at the gate, the way she didn't ask why you hadn't done your job, because the question didn't deserve air, the way that she walked you through every inch of the mistake without giving you something to hide behind, the way she corrected you with precision, not emotion. And more than anything, you remember the quiet click of the lock. Not a slam, not a punishment, just a clear message. Final. The moment had been closed, and what you had been let in just far enough to see what has been held to the standard didn't need comfort. Now it was on to you. You stood there until your legs began to ache and your shoulders dropped from the weight of the cold. Then you stepped down from the porch, boots creaking against the wood, and walked back to the path towards your room. It was darker now, quieter, the kind of quiet that listens. When you reached your bed, you didn't toss your coat in the chair. You folded it neatly. You didn't collapse into the blankets. You sat down first, took a breath, looked at the floor, And for the first time that night, you whispered something into the silence that felt more than a vow than a thought. Not out loud, not to her, to yourself. This will never happen again. Because you were given one job that didn't mean to be trusted to be finished once. It meant to be counted on, to be carried every time. And tonight you learned what it meant to be reminded.